So friends, this is deep and very rich content. And so just, if you're sitting there going, wow, this is really deep and rich content, it's because it is. So you just tell yourself that you're going to concentrate. I'll do my very best to make it interesting and engaging, but I think it's really important material. So this question of the human person, obvious the question, why does it even matter? Archbishops excluded, if we were to do a show of hands of who in the last few days has had a deep conversation at the office or with your family on the nuances of philosophical anthropology, there's probably not a lot of hands going up, right? And as I say to people, if you were to go to your average Australian pub and you're sitting at a table next to these guys, it's unlikely that you'll hear something like, Steve, I just really struggled with it, trying to understand whether existence precedes essence and whether my ontological self is the truest reflection of who I really am on this crazy journey of life. And then the guy next to me goes, oh, you too, mate, all the time. I don't know what I'm going to do about it. It's not something that tends to impress itself upon the common consciousness very often. But I'm going to suggest to you why I think it's such a big, important question for evangelists, for people in families, in marriages, for all of us. So I'll introduce you to the concept through what we call the three crisis model. The three crisis model suggests that the church in her history has encountered three great crises since the inception of the church at Pentecost. And each of those crises comes in the form of a question. So we'll spin through them really quickly because our attention today is on the third one. The first great crisis that the church faced was the crisis of the question, what is the nature of God? What is the nature of God? So back in the early church, we had all these heresies, right? All these confusing moments about, well, was Christ really physical? Was he appeared to be physical? Did he really have a physical body? How many natures was he? Some of you will know we had heresies like Docetism, Arianism, Apollinarianism, Nestorianism, Monophysitism. We get the Council of Nicaea in 325. We believe in one God. So that great crisis continued for several hundred years. Second great crisis in the church's history was when somebody you may have heard of called Martin Luther decided to nail 95 theses on these literal doors in Wittenberg way back on the 31st of October 1517, which led to the second great crisis. What is not the nature of God? What is the nature of the church? What is the nature of the church? Ecclesiology. Great big crisis, Reformation, Counter-Reformation, big, long things still being worked out in the church's history. But we find ourselves now in the third great crisis. You didn't ask to be born when you were born, but you are born in the midst of a great crisis question. And that question is, what does it mean to be a human person? What does it mean to be a human person? I would suggest that every great crisis in the world at the moment, economics, geopolitics, marriage, human sexuality, always come down to ultimately questions of what is a person? What is good for a person? What leads to the person's flourishing? So in philosophical anthropology, we talk about this thing called eudaimonia, human flourishing. What sorts of things, what sorts of behaviors, what sorts of relationships tend to lead to the human person becoming all that they were created to become? What does it mean to be human? And what I say to people is, before we should ever say what a person should do, normative behaviors, well, you should behave this way. This is a good way to behave. Before we should ever say what somebody should do, we have to be able to effectively say what they are. Why? Because in classical philosophy, we have something called teleology, the purpose of something. Think of it like this. Function follows form. Function follows form. What does it mean? Well, what something does is intimately related to what it is. So I had a few hundred teachers in the room recently, and I did a live experiment. I got a piece of wood, and I got a nail, 3-inch nail. And I called this teacher up and said, I'm going to give you 3 objects. And I want you to somehow get this 3-inch nail into this piece of wood with one of these objects. So I go backstage, I run out. First object I've got is a pillow. And I give them the pillow and I say, please, put the 3-inch nail into the wood. Obviously they can't do it. I run back, I get the second object. I get a raw, fresh egg. And I'm standing there, I give them safety glasses a whole bit. And I'm like, put this nail into the wood. And they're like, oh man, I can't, it's going to make a mess. And then so I go backstage and I come out with a brand new East Wing hammer. And I said, can you put the nail into this? Tap it in, done, right? What's the point? The function, what the thing does, what it's optimized for, is a reflection of what it is. So I said, if I walked into a tribe that had never had much human contact, right? Some remote area still in the world, had never had any real human contact, and if I just pulled out from behind my back a hammer and put it on the ground, I wonder, I don't know if I'm right, but I wonder if they would just pick it up and intuitively pick it up by the handle. The form, the shape would suggest a particular kind of use, right? A utility. See, if you pick up the hammer by the head, you could maybe do something, you could poke someone with it. But if you're holding a hammer, it makes sense, doesn't it? It suggests itself to you. So the question is there something about the form of the human person? And I won't go deeply into this today, but if you think about the church's entire teaching on marriage and human sexuality, you begin to see where some of that could be useful. What does it mean to be a human person? Because before we should say what someone should do, we have to be able to say what they are. So how do we get here? Again, you don't have Karen in the room today to stop me because I'm just like a academic, philosophical nerd. And if I could go down this rabbit hole, you'd never see me again. So I'm just going to do it briefly. I just want to talk a little bit about all of these great issues in the world at the moment, and I'm not going into them today, but issues around relationship, gender, all those sorts of things that are challenging for the church, yeah? And challenging for all of us as Catholics. How do we talk about these issues? How do we deal with them? I want us to understand that we didn't get here by accident, and here's one way to explain it. Our present understandings of what it means to be human didn't just suddenly present themselves to us. They have a very long history, and we explain it like this. This is a great painting of the storming of the Bastille, the apotheosis, the peak moment of the French Revolution. So what I say to people is this: the French Revolution was not the cause of the French Revolution. What does that mean? Well, the French Revolution didn't cause the revolution, it was the revolution. Something else caused it. So if you study it closely, you go back several hundred years and you find that there were all sorts of agricultural reforms and relationships with the king and all sorts of stuff was happening that led to this peak moment. So what I'm trying to tell you is this crisis about the person goes back a long way. This is another famous painting of related to Homer's Iliad. And I just want to give you a very simple idea. This is sort of as complex as I want to get today. The philosophers that I've studied deeply on this topic, Alistair McIntyre, Charles Taylor, Philip Reef, like us to understand something called first, second, and third world cultures. First, second, and third world cultures. It is the opposite of what we would think. So a first world culture and a second world culture are cultures that believe that there is an external super transcendent force in the world, right? That there is some kind of God. Think of Zeus on Mount Olympus, or for the Greeks in the Iliad, they believed that all sorts of human events were being influenced by these transcendent divine forces. So all I'm saying is in first and second world cultures, and we would say Christianity is in fact part of a second world culture, we believe in some kind of absolute, some kind of divine reference point. Why am I telling you that? Because this is the quote, actual quote. Now, why I'm showing you this is to lead you here. What we've emerged into is what they now call a third world culture, which is simply this. Identity is not conferred by the god or gods, it's conferred by the self. That the individual human person constructs their sense of who they are, what is good for them, what is not good for them. We've just completely dropped this idea that God gets a vote. So think about some of the great big issues. We're not going to go into detail today, but the great big issues challenging the church have got their roots in that kind of, who are you to tell me what to do? Who are you to tell me? I define my own reality. And you see those issues flowing across culture at the moment. Remember, we said in the last session that there is a throne at the center of the cosmos. And if God is not on that throne, something else will be. So what first world cultures do, the one that we are living in now, is whether people are conscious of it or not, is they place themselves there, or their autonomy there, or their own individual rights there. And there's a brilliant book from any of my academics in the room called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self by Carl Trueman, and he puts it like this. So when you remove the transcendent from the basis of culture, you don't get utopia. You get the gulag. I'm sorry, friends. I'm a student of history, and I'll give you some quotes on it, but once you take the transcendent out of the picture, Pope Benedict was big on this. What you get is a raw exercise of human power. That is what you get. In the absence of a decalogue, in the absence of a transcendent reality, you get the raw exercise of power. How could it be any other way? We'd like to think that humans will sit around together and come up with benevolent, beautiful, utilitarian systems, but that's not the path of history. 120 million plus people died last century as a result of some of these ideas. This is a beautiful quote from Gaudium et Spes, paragraph 36. Very simple. Without the creator, the creature would disappear. When God is forgotten, the creature itself grows unintelligible. Where do we come from? What is our destiny? What's the purpose of our life? We just construct it ourselves. So, back in 1983, the Russian dissident writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn, in the Templeton lecture talking about the Russian gulags, had this to say. More than half a century ago, while I was still a child, I recall hearing a number of the older people offer the following explanation for the great disasters that had befallen Russia. Men have forgotten God. That's why all this has happened. Because Russia was a very Christian country before 1917. It had its problems. But one of the greatest dissident writers says it happened because people forgot God. So the last of the heavy quotes, I'll just give you this one to look at. So these currents, people are just not aware of them. People just think this is the way the world is. But we're not aware of these great currents that have shaped this moment that we're all coming into. So, in the midst of that, can we possibly know what is true? So, again, you can see I'm pushing here through a lot of content, but can we know what is true? There's a beautiful quote from Chesterton. It's very simple. He says this. Well, you guys are familiar with people saying truth is relative, right? Who are you, bigoted Christian, to tell me because truth is relative? And my truth and your truth. Well, Chesterton said back in 1935, it's very cool, he said, if truth is relative, to what is it relative? See, I timed that perfectly. I usually prefer a cymbal roll, but that was pretty good. If truth is relative, to what is it relative? For truth to be relative, it can only be relative to some concept of an absolute standard of truth. Again, rabbit hole, but how do you know that blue exists? Because in your head, there is a category called blueness. This is Plato's Cave of the Shadows, all sorts of stuff, a priori knowledge. It's that, how do you know something's blue? Jonathan, what are you talking about? I don't think about this stuff. No, but we don't. But there is in our head a category called blueness. How can we know even the concept of truth? Because somewhere rattling around in our preternatural consciousness is a sense that there is something called truth. Maybe. So, my academic background was looking at people like Nietzsche and Pascal and Descartes. Some of you would remember Descartes' cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Long story to that, but basically moved consciousness from a divine paradigm to a subjective paradigm. He didn't actually mean to do it. He was Christian. But it just opened up this whole new world. So what is the church saying to this? I love this slide. It's a favourite. I know you all got your favourite catechism quotes. We can trade them at lunch. This is one of my favourites. Oh, friends, that's a good one. What does it mean? Remember K-Pax Day? This is kind of similar. The church wants you to know that yes, sin has wounded our faculties, but it has not obliterated them or eclipsed them. What does it mean? By being made in the Imago Dei, by being a child of God, you share in something of the divine reason, which means what? You can come to know the truth. You can. It's a faculty. Yes, it's been marred. Yes, it's not perfect. But it can be educated, reformed, and elevated, and we can know what's true. So we need to come back to that as Catholics to remember that no, God's made us able to do this. And it doesn't mean we're insensitive or we're triumphalistic. It just means, because if it's not true, then whatever, friends. It's just subjective, right? So way back on September 5, 1979, standing on an artistic replication of the Loggia balcony in St. Peter's, John Paul II began his famous Wednesday catecheses that some of you would know of, theology of the body. But there's two words that he coined that day that are very important. He said, what we need is an adequate anthropology. They're really important words for Catholics to know. An adequate anthropology. He said, what we need in this world that we're going into, this tumultuous new era of humanity, is an adequate anthropology. What does he mean adequate? He says, we need a story about the person that is fit for purpose. All of my corporate types in the room know what I'm talking about. Fit for purpose. We need a story about the person that is adequate, that tells the truth, that is fit for purpose. And the last thing before we get in there is just to say to you, what does the story of your own life tell you? We call this phenomenology. What have you learned in your life? What has made you cry? What has brought you unspeakable joy? What have you felt in the journey of your life? Now, your feelings are not the sum total of reality, but has not your heart taught you certain things? Love, joy. Don't certain things lift you to praise and some things deject you? So, why does this matter? What happens when we get the person wrong? If we get the person wrong, all sorts of things happen. When we get the person wrong, if we don't have an adequate anthropology, if we don't have a true picture of what it means to be human, we get to here. What you think a person is will determine how you treat them. You sure? Well, let's have some examples, right? Here's one. Arbeit macht frei. Through work to freedom. Anyone recognize those gates? Yeah? Okay, there's the gates to Auschwitz. This is a gas chamber. 500 men, women and children at a time, stripped naked, Zyklonol B pumped through the sprinkler valves in the roof. If they ran out of that, they put a hole in the wall, put a diesel generator in and put diesel fumes in. The gas ovens. How do you put 6 million people up a smokestack? I've been telling people for 25 years, it's the terrible thing. Some of you would have known Hannah Arendt, The Banality of Evil. The terrible thing about this is how easy it is to do. What do I mean? How do you put 6 million people up a smokestack? You just do this. You cross a line in your mind, this big, where you just go, that's a person, that's not. That's a person, that's not. Tolstoy famously said that the dividing line between good and evil does not run through nations and empires, it runs through the middle of the human heart. So, when we get the person wrong, the most extraordinary things happen. Here's a counterexample. Some of you recognize this face. But many of you would not know the story of her very first ever encounter. She was working with the Loretto sisters. She was teaching English to relatively wealthy families in India. She's walking home one day. She finds somebody who's lying there on the side of the road. She takes them to a local hospital. They refuse to treat the person. She takes this person back to the side room where she rented a little room on her own in the side of a Hindu temple. She sits with this person in her journals, first person she ever worked with. She said she only did two things. Two things. She said, number one, I washed their body. 6 million people up a smokestack, one person having their body washed by a complete stranger. Account for the difference. Then she did the second thing. She wrote in her journal, I held their hands and I looked into their eyes and I smiled as they died. Because the last thing I wanted them to see on this earth was a face of love. 6 million people up a smokestack, one person loved to the point of death by a complete stranger. Account for the difference. Account for the difference. The only way you can explain it is what you think a person is will determine what you do and how you treat them. You know, I told that story about running past that guy every morning. You know why? Because I'm thinking, you're a child of God, and I'm going to be nice to you until it drives you mad. Because I'm just like, I do this sometimes. Not all the time. I'm an imperfect person, but I'm like, Christ died for you. You're a child of the Father. Can you just imagine for a second a world where that was the dominant paradigm, when politics was run that way? And business and families, and not this side of heaven, but we're just here to play our part. So to sort of finish, just wanted to give you 4 core principles that I teach to help us begin to understand the importance of the human person. Principle number 1, the goodness of creation. Contrary to our opponents in the world, and the church does have them, the first thing the church says about reality, about creation, about the human body, is it is good. Yes, it is marred by sin. Yes, this is a post-lapsarian reality. But God, as Thomas Aquinas said, is the only necessary being. He didn't have to do anything. What is the first question of all philosophy? Why is there something rather than nothing? Did you know that? It's the first question of all philosophy. Why is there something rather than nothing? You know the answer? Because God's nature itself is and it is good. And Genesis specifically tells us it is good. So that we begin with the goodness of creation itself. Again, some of you would know the Gnostic heresies, all that stuff. The church Gnosticism tried to strangle the church in the cradle. And Gnosticism, of course, teaches that creation is wicked and evil and we need to escape it as fast as possible. But the church's position is that, and you can see it. I went for a walk at 6 a.m. this morning at Sandy Bay. I'm just standing there on that headland going, not bad. Not bad. It's good. So really the first Catholic proclamation, because what do our opponents think of us? You're anti-everything, you're angry at everybody, you don't want people doing things. What's the truth? We've got to get back out of the crouch and start to go, no. We're not playing by those rules anymore. This is a beautiful creation given to us out of the goodness of God. Yes, it is not perfect. Yes, sin has entered the world. Second principle, the Imago Dei. Creation in the image of God. First principle, the goodness of creation. Second principle, let us make man. Hebrew, ha-adam, the person, in our image and likeness. Friends, as Stephen I think said this morning, we come, it's so good that you're here, but we can forget this stuff. Do you understand the magnificence of that, the magnitude of that? The same God who flings galaxies from his fingertips, ordained that you would be. Karen used to say when we were speaking a lot together, John Paul II used to say that Eve is the pinnacle of creation. Woman is the pinnacle of creation. You read Paradise Lost, the beautiful language. To be made in God's image, to share in his faculties. Do you know that's true about you? I don't know if you feel that way. But you share in the divine stamp. That's pretty good news. So I often say to people, how do you judge the value of an artwork? Random question. How do you judge the value of an artwork? I don't know if I'm right on this, but there are 2 criteria. 1, who the artist was. 2, scarcity. Think about it. Most expensive painting in the world, the Mona Lisa. Approximately how many Da Vinci's are there? Not paintings, but persons. 1. How many Mona Lisas did he do? So the artist is pretty fancy. And imagine if he'd done 50 Mona Lisas. They'd still be worth a lot because they're Da Vinci's, but he did one. So here are my criteria. What's the value of an artwork? Who the artist was? Scarcity. Who the artist was? Scarcity. So you could take me, I often say you could get the 10 best painting teachers in the world. Take me today, for the next 20, 30 years of my life, 12 hours a day, they teach me one thing. The masters teach me how to copy the Mona Lisa. I come back in 30 years and I show you my Mona Lisa and I say to you, please give me €1 billion for my Mona Lisa. You know what would happen? You'd look and go, Jonathan, that's good. That is really close, man. But you ain't Da Vinci. I ain't giving you nothing. I managed it 30 years. Nice, but that was stupid and you ain't Da Vinci. So here's my point. The value of the artwork is based on the artist and scarcity. Simple question. Who is the artist of the human person? Who is the artist of the person sitting next to you? We got Glenda here. In cosmic history, there has only ever been one of you. There will only ever be one of you. She will never exist again or has existed before in cosmic history. The scarcity of Glenda's existence is unspeakable. And the artist was the supreme God of the cosmos. So the next principle of the value of the person is that we are made in the image and likeness of God. Beautiful line here from the Bishops' Conference a few years ago. Have I got that slide here? Does it come in a little bit later? It does. I might do it. Yeah, I'll do it in order. Okay. Third principle. Embodiment. 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 The physical human body. What do our opponents think? You Catholics, you got problems with the body. Friends, that's just Freud. Freud's a train wreck. I studied Freud at the highest levels. The guy's a disaster. Like, he honestly is. He's just, everyone's drunk the Kool-Aid. You read this guy, he's got one idea. One idea. His idea is that everything, that culture itself only exists because of because of overwhelming human sexual urges, and that's the whole reason for religion, culture, everything. Oh, that's an impressive idea. Like, everything's just reduced to that, is it? Everything. Everything. Yes. Anyway. He's not here to defend himself. So, but my other favourite, how many of y'all have heard, God is dead from Nietzsche? You know that one? You heard that? It actually comes from a much bigger thing in a book, and it's an interesting point that he's making. It's actually quite interesting. But when I was an undergrad at uni, someone had written on a desk, this is a true story, had written, God is dead, Nietzsche. Some edgy undergrad had written, God is dead, Nietzsche. Take that, you religious bigots. I'm not making this up. A month later, I'm back at the same desk, and someone had written, Nietzsche is dead, God. And we know one of them's right. All right? Anyway, embodiment. I want you to first understand this. The great classical traditions saw the body as a massive, massive, massive problem. Here's the proof. I'm going to give you direct proof. So the classical philosophy out of which the Western tradition came had big problems with the body. Here's the direct quotes. Plato. Seneca, cheery guy. Next one. But wait till you get a go at Epictetus. Can you imagine seeing him on the street? Hey, Epictetus, how you doing, man? I'm fine. You all right? Yeah, I'm okay. I'm just poor soul shackled to a corpse. He's not coming to your birthday, right? What is the church's response to that? Hello, Fra Angelico. The daring raid on enemy territory. If the church has a problem with the human body, then why did her Lord and Saviour enter physical reality itself? Why did he take the physical form of the human body? It was utterly scandalous to classical philosophy. The body was detestable matter. And you're telling us you have a religion where the God of the cosmos would come into that and indwell it? Yes. Because we call biblical hermeneutics. Everything Christ did, he's telling us something. Everything he did is telling us something. Why was he a carpenter? Because he was trying to tell us that work's important. Everything he does, food, drink, wine, healing, all of it is hermeneutic. He's teaching us. He enters the body. Tertullian, 3rd century, caro salutis cardo, the flesh is the hinge of salvation. The flesh is the hinge of salvation. So our opponents want to say, you got to hang up with the body. What we're trying to say, what we've got to start saying is, oh, no, we ain't playing by those rules anymore. We're telling you that the problem we have with some things is because the body is so precious, so beautiful, so important, so holy, that we need to treat it that way. Christ returns in the physical body. So our bodies, yes, there is sin. Yes, they are not perfect. But by grace, they can be restored to a lot of the vision that God has for them this side of eternity. The last couple of things on this, just the angelic doctor, Thomas Aquinas. Just do this quickly. Aristotle, I guess classical philosophy had this idea of, the flesh was the lower reality, the spirit was the higher one, right? And the body was just to be tolerated at best. Aquinas really gives us the doctrine of body-soul unity. That the Catholic proposition is that the human person is a body-soul composite. Now, if you're sitting there going, that's a bit academic for me, listen carefully. A body-soul composite. A body-soul composite. What happens to the body affects the soul. And the soul animates the body. Do you see where this could go? What we do in the body affects the soul. What we do in the body relates to the soul because they're an integral composite unit. So maybe perhaps the church's teaching on certain things might be a way of saying the body is so important because what happens in the body is affecting the immortal soul. But at least what I do want you to take away is that the church's message for the world is the goodness of the body, the goodness of creation, the beauty of marriage, the beauty of celibacy. Because bodies matter, bodies matter, bodies matter. It's not a question of no. It's a question of, do you have any idea how precious this thing is and how beautiful it is? So one of the things I say to people is, this is my parents. Married for many years. My father's been dead a long time. And this is my father just before he died. Has anyone in this room ever been in the room with somebody as they're dying? Be a few of you, right? Anybody been in the room with someone as they died? Here's a strange question. When they were dying, or when they died, did any of the nursing staff come in and say to you, hey, listen, they've just died. There's a couple of rules here you need to know. No yelling, no shouting, no high-fiving, no, getting raucous and silly. Everyone's going, where are you going with this? No one's ever had that experience, right? You know why? I used to do this with high schoolers. I used to say, what do people, they might cry, but what is the default setting that people go to at the moment that someone dies? See, when my father died, I got to wash his body. And I remember holding his hands and I'm just washing his hands, right? And I used to say this to teenagers. I'd say, what's a word that describes how you relate to the body of someone that's just died? And kids would go, well, like respectful. Yeah. Can you think of another word that starts with R? Anyone? Reverence. Reverence. What's my point? Wait for this line, it's really important. If we default to reverence at the moment someone dies, here's the question. Why do you have to wait for someone to die to reverence their body? And you will not find an answer. Why is it that only when someone dies we go, oh, this is how we should treat them? Why? I spent a decade talking to teenagers about sexual decision making, and none of it for a second was about, no. It was like, do you have any idea what you are dealing with? The beauty, the preciousness. Why do you have to wait for someone to die to have a disposition of reverence? Almost done. So what do we got? The goodness of creation. Why does the person matter? Because if you get the person wrong, really bad stuff happens. In politics, in war, in all of it. So we want to get into what? An adequate anthropology. You want to walk into lunch today, and you don't have to say it out loud, but when you are standing talking to somebody, you are standing on holy ground. You are standing before an unrepeatable miracle. What world would that create if you just walked around every day? Just with that. So the last one is just resolving this question. If we are made in the Imago Dei, we have a problem, because God seemed to have a very big problem in the Old Testament with images. So how can we be made in the image of God if God has no image? This is the second most valuable painting in the world, the Christus Salvabitur Mundus. Colossians 1:15. He is the visible image of the invisible God. Where am I going? To be human is to be made in the Imago Dei. So if you want to know what the Imago Dei is, all you need to do is look at the visible image of the invisible God. Gaudium et Spes 22, very famous line. It is only in the mystery. Our culture has a huge problem with mystery, huge problem. We don't do it very well. Whereas medieval cultures, they got it, but we don't. It is only in the mystery, the mysterion of the Word made flesh, that the mystery of man, Adam, the person, takes light. It is only, if you will never understand the person if you do not look here. You will never understand what it means to be fully human if you do not look here. You will spend your life, and the philosophers of the age have done exactly that. They have turned themselves inside out looking for philosophies and theories. What they were missing was a person. How does Jonathan become more fully human? Well, I can tell you, in the heart of the church, by the grace of her sacraments, I have tried, in my own limitations and weakness, to know him, to chase him, to pursue him, to ask him to make me like him, because I will never be fully human without that. Here's a question. I keep trying to sell people, to know Christ, to be like him, is to become fully who you are. Here's an important question. Approximately, how much more of your life, a day, a week, a month, how much more of your life would you like to spend not being who you really are? Because as we seek him, become like him, we become fully human. And for what it's worth, I haven't gone down the path today, but the great questions of this age, the static that you will sense, the resistance you will face in the world, will be primarily around human sexuality. I mean, let's just be honest. I often say to people, have you noticed that nobody really has a problem with the Catholic Church's position on economics? Have you noticed? Have you noticed that people aren't just dragging people to all sorts of tribunals and stuff because, well, you've been preaching about that economics again, and that's just not right. There's all these people who just don't understand Keynesian debt-based monetary systems, and you've been preaching it, and look what's happened. Friends, we're all grown-ups here, right? We pretty much know exactly why people struggle with the gospel. Fulton Sheen said in the 1950s, he said, there are not more than 100 people in the United States who hate the Catholic Church. But there are millions who hate what they think is the Catholic Church. So just on the pastoral side to finish, I am done. Daniel's pacing nervously around the back of the room. This is from Grabowski's seminal book on this topic. And you know what? This has been my experience. I would love to know where all these mean, nasty Christians and Catholics are that are just being mean to everybody. I don't deny there's probably somewhere, but I haven't met one really. My dominant experience of priests and bishops and lay people is the default setting is compassion, friendship, engagement. That's what I've witnessed. Maybe I hang out in the wrong circles. And the last one's very beautiful. Where did we start in the first talk? What does the Father want? He wants his kids back. Come home. Come home. The church's teaching on the body, on human sexuality, on life, marriage, relationships, all of it is come home, come home, come home. Come home. The light's always on. Come home. So friends, you didn't ask for it, but you are born at this moment in history when the great question of the age is, what is the nature of the person? So we want to witness it. We want to witness to it. We want to live it by grace. Ask for help to live it. And don't underestimate the power of witness, right? Of beautiful vocations, of beautiful religious vocations, beautiful marriages. Shout out to all the grandparents who witnessed to just the beauty of wisdom and age and life. Like, let's be fully human. And how are we going to do that? We're going to be fully human by staying there and finding Him in the heart of the church. If you could just turn to the person next to you and say, you look even more radiant with holiness. Thank you, friends. God bless.